and welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today, yet another special guest episode. I have a returning guest that I was just so thrilled to have back on the show. Andrew from Our Last Meal podcast will be talking with us today about his grandmother and her passing. I cannot say enough how much I enjoy talking with Andrew. He is such a kind soul. He and I are very much kindred spirits in that we are all about destigmatizing the grief and talking about the griefs. So he'll talk about his podcast a little bit, but I'm going to plug it here as well. Please check out Our Last Meal. It is such a beautiful podcast. He has a different person on every week to tell a story of grief, of someone they lost, and of special food or meal that they used to share. And it's all about food and grief, two of my favorite topics. So definitely please check out Our Last Meal podcast. Also, don't forget to check me out over on Patreon. We're getting close to the end of the month now, and it's my birthday month. And I know that whole birthday month thing is silly. Anyway, but I had a goal for this month to get 10 new Patreon patrons. And as of yet, I have 3. And I believe they've gotten their shout outs. So if I missed one, I'll get you on the next episode, I promise. I do these so far ahead of time that sometimes I'm 2 or 3 weeks out. So I promise, if you join my Patreon, you will get a shout out. Okay. Thank you. So check that out, patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. All right, enough of that. Without further ado, here's my lovely conversation with the beautiful human Andrew from Our Last Meal podcast. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in this week, ladies and gentlemen. I have a repeat guest on the show. I'm super, super excited to have back on the show Andrew from Our Last Meal podcast. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and why you're here today?
Yeah, of course. I appreciate that. So my name is Andrew. As you mentioned, I host the podcast Our Last Meal, Loss, Grief, and Food. And it centers around the idea of the grieving process from losing somebody. What I try to focus on is that grief isn't always death. Grief can be a relationship ending, a friendship ending. I've had people that come on to talk about, just a change in their lives and that being something that they kind of grieve. But I always try to talk to them about how does that connect to food. And, what I've found from talking with people is that, when we've lost someone or we've lost the time in our lives, there's always a food that can bring us back to that person or bring that person back to us or bring us back to a time. And I like food. I always like food.
Me too.
So I enjoy talking with people about food in my everyday life anyway. And I am a very big proponent in being more open and honest about grief and, that process. So to me, it just kind of felt like a natural connection. So it's cool to get to talk to people about that.
Hey. And this is why you and I get along so well. So we totally agree on that. Nobody is talking about grief. And I do this all the day with my job too, talking about death and destigmatizing that, because nobody wants to talk about death either. Yeah. It's a highly stigmatized subject, and it's usually connected with being sad, which I don't always feel that way about it. I think grief can be incredibly joyful at times too.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting way to put it, because, we do assume that grief is always going to be a sad feeling, but I think one of the best ways I've heard it explained is, grief is just an expression of love.
Yes, I say that all the time. Yay!
Yeah, I say this as someone who, I think if I tell people I have a podcast about like death and grief and loss, it's a very morbid thing to say, but it's not like, I'm not like a goth kid. I'm not obsessed with it. I'm just, it does scare me, but it's one of those things, like, it's like that and taxes. And so, we should talk about it. We should at least we should make other people feel welcome when they're going through that. And because it is a very alienating feeling when you're in the midst of it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know, like I've brought this, I found a new statistic, and I bring this up now and then, that the mortality rate for humans is 100%. I don't know if you knew that or not, but it is.
Wow.
I know.
What was the margin of error on that?
0 margin of error. Like, just
dang. Okay.
I know. I know. So that's why we need to just go ahead and start talking about it
Yeah.
because guess what? It's gonna happen.
See, that's a little bit nicer version of something I heard recently. One of my favorite musicians had and this is not it's not pleasant necessarily, but has a line in one of his songs that life is a joke and death is the punchline.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. So it's like you said, it's 100% guaranteed, and
Hmm.
it's not a matter of glorifying it, but it is a matter of like, hey, accepting we all have the
Yeah.
same fate, and how do
Yeah.
we help each other along the way? Because I mean, one of the
Hmm.
things as humans that we do is we pass things along.
Hmm.
One of the things I talk about on my podcast is passing along food,
Hmm.
and you're essentially talking about passing along love.
Yeah.
That's what grief is. So
Hmm. Absolutely. And that's something I work on with my clients as well is when my clients as a death doula,
yeah,
um, I work with a dying person to see what kind of legacy they want to leave behind, whether it's like physical or, non-physical, if they want to make a thing to leave behind to their family or just a memory or how they were as a person, like what the kind of legacy they want to leave behind. And I just heard today a great story about another death doula who had a client who was known for her whole family for her cooking. She was a fantastic cook.
yeah.
So they helped put all her recipes together in a recipe book to give to the family. And they made aprons out of a bunch of her old shirts.
Oh my
And
God,
I know, isn't that beautiful? So they wrapped the,
that really
the
is.
recipe book in the aprons and gave those out to everybody in the family.
See,
I
okay,
love that.
that's I'm trying to keep it together right now because
Oh,
that's beautiful.
yeah.
And that means something to me. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I know we were going to talk about my grandmother today.
Yes.
Um Something I actually got from my aunt who now has her house. I got some of her old cookbooks and just like recipes that she, kept over the years. And I have some that actually have her handwriting in it. So just having
Oh.
it's not cookbooks she wrote. They're not all
Mhm.
her recipes, but these are cookbooks that that she held on to, that she found things in there that she wanted to try, that she made. And it is really cool to have something in my office that I'm like, I've got that tangible thing. I can hold
Oh,
something that my
yeah.
grandmother held.
Hmm. Yeah, I have sitting right beside me and is this is a compass that belonged to my grandfather. Yeah, and my mom gave that to me because she knows I go hiking a lot. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, that way grandpa's with me.
Oh my
I know. He's helping lead the way.
God. I
Anyway.
I don't know. Those are small mementos like that. I mean,
Hmm.
there's something really cool to me about being able to hold something in your hand that was held by somebody you care about.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and I'm a nerd in this too, and I'll go a little bit further. Like I love old used books.
Hmm.
I started reading a new book last night, and I looked at the front of it. It was this book was printed in 1989, which was I was like a year and a half old whenever this book was printed, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I just can't help but kind of romanticize like who had this book before me, who all has
Yeah.
touched this and read this,
Hmm.
and like that's cool. But when it's something that belonged to family and someone you really love,
Yeah.
like it's a whole nother level.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I love that so much. And I have a few things. I love fountain pens. I'm a fountain pen enthusiast. And I have one of my grandfather's fountain pen. Oh, are you going to show me some
Yep,
fountain pen?
I've got a couple too.
Yay.
See, this is why we click.
I know. Yeah, my aunt was cleaning out an old desk and found a little writing set that belonged to my grandfather, and it had like a little pencil and a fountain pen.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get it to work. And I went to a stationery store here in Columbus, and the guy at the store, like you would have thought I just handed him a bar of gold. He was like, I have never seen one of these in person because it's like a real old model. And he
Oh
was happy to
wow,
help me get it cleaned out and working again so I can use it.
that is so cool.
I know.
And especially like it being something that you already had an affinity for, and then
Hmm.
finding something like I, I love finding these little connections to people that we care about that we didn't know we had.
Hmm.
And it could be something as simple as like, oh, their favorite type of pen was a fountain pen. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just really cool.
I love that. So then, speaking of grandparents, you wanted to talk to us a little bit about your grandmother today.
Yeah, so my grandmother, she passed away last December of 2022 at the age of 90.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Ruby, grandma.
Oh,
I call her Grandma Justice, which
oh,
so and I know it sounds like a superhero name, and I actually kind of made that joke on my show. I have a new episode actually tomorrow that releases for my new season. And I start out the season talking about my grandmother, and my grandma Justice, she passed away at the age of 90, and she was such a sweet woman. You know, I think not everybody, most people, I think, have nothing but nice things to say about their grandmothers.
Hmm.
There's something so important about the role of a grandmother, I think,
Oh
and
yeah.
my grandmother, she was all of that. She
Mm.
was a sweet person. She had strength in a way that I don't know that there's anyone else in my life I've ever known that exhibited the same way that she did,
Okay.
you know? And I don't it's a hard thing to put into words. She was strong in her convictions. Um, full transparency, beliefs, she and I would not see eye to eye on that. But, she's I never heard her say a hateful word in my life.
Hmm.
Um, I want to be delicate in the way I say this, but I have a certain perception of Christians based on experiences I've had throughout my life and things I've heard
Hmm.
from them, seen from them.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and it's always the loudest ones, but my grandmother, she was a very devout woman, but she practiced what she preached. She walked the talk, right?
Yeah.
I never heard her say a hateful word about anyone. Um, she radiated love and kindness, to everyone around her.
Hmm.
I remember, vividly just spending time with her as a kid. You know, oh God, okay. So I talk about her in the very first episode of my show.
Okay.
And I talk about some of the foods that I would eat at her house growing up, and it's simple stuff. The big thing for me was always her fried cornbread. That's the favorite thing that she made that I can never get quite right.
Yeah, I remember you
Um,
mentioning that before. Yeah.
it was so good. It was just great. Um, and I remember, just eating with her growing up. The first 5 years of my life, we lived just up the road from them, and then we moved all around. But I would still spend time with her every summer, and I would look forward to just getting to eat with her and just hang out with her and spend time with just my entire extended family, my cousins, and all that. But getting to have some one-on-one time with her was always really important to me.
Hmm.
Um, and so she started deteriorating in health a few years ago. She had diabetes for my entire life, and I think most of hers. And I don't know the types, the one or the two. I should know that, but um she always had it. She had that for decades and dealt with it, but it was a dementia or Alzheimer's that started to impact her towards the end. And I've
Hmm.
never gotten a clear answer on which it was.
Hmm.
Um but she just spent the last couple of years of her life, in confusion.
Hmm.
And it sucked because I mean she was always such a just like a witty lady in like
Hmm.
a really subtle way. She would never like claim it, but she was always so funny and just clever. Um, so it was really difficult to see that those last couple of years, her kind of
Hmm.
deteriorating. Um, and towards the end, and you've probably seen this with your clients in the past, is that you have a lot of good days, you have a lot of bad days, and it gets to a point where it feels like the bad days start to outweigh the good days.
Yeah.
Um, the last time I got to see her alive, though, was a mostly good day. She was in the hospital, and I had traveled to get my mom to take her to see her because the concern was you may not see your mom alive again. I want you to spend time with her, and I want to spend time with her.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember being in the hospital with her, and it's me, my mom, and my uncle. And I just remember talking with her, and at one point she's holding my hand, and she didn't know she couldn't remember my name. But I remember her at one point. I was telling her about food I used to eat at her house growing up because it just again, I'm a food person. I'm food driven. It's how I guess it's how I like to remember things. So I was just telling her about some of these foods, and she just looked at me and smiled and just said, "You'll always be one of my boys."
Oh.
It is it is really hard to explain how you can be 35 and immediately feel like a 5-year-old again.
Oh.
I miss her every day.
Yeah.
And I hate that she had so much confusion and pain in the last couple of years of her life.
Yeah.
I hate that I did not get to spend as much time with her at the end as I would have liked.
Mhm.
But I am so forever grateful that I at least had that moment with her. And yeah, and it's I don't think funny's the right I don't think funny's the right word, but I guess the last, I'll share this with you. This will be in my show too, but I guess technically the last meal that I ever got to share with her was feeding her Jello that day in the hospital.
Mhm.
Um, I remember just to give you just to explain just how sweet and caring she was. She's 90, and I'm feeding her Jello, and then she tries to offer me some of it too from and and
Oh.
she's like, it's
Oh my
in that
goodness.
situation, like they're not going to give you a whole lot of a whole lot of anything good. So, Jello
Hmm.
is really a treat there. So she's still trying to share it with me. But yeah, the last meal I ever got to have with my grandmother, technically, I guess, was me feeding her Jello. Um, and I remember that. I hope I will always remember that. And I'm just really thankful that I am thankful that she was my grandmother. I am
Yeah.
incredibly thankful for that. I am really happy that my daughter got to meet her, and I'm glad I got pictures
Oh,
of them together.
yeah.
I got pictures of my daughter with both of my grandparents, and
Hmm.
she still remembers them too, which is great because she's 7, she was 3, she was 3, I think, the day specifically I'm thinking of.
Hmm.
Like it still stands out to them, or
Oh,
still stands out to her.
good.
So she still remembers them and asks, and we'll talk about them sometimes. So
Oh,
yeah.
oh, I love that. I have a good friend who lives in Boston, and her husband's mother passed away, and they have a little boy, and he's
Mm.
5 now. I believe he was just 2 when she died, and he's still not quite grasping what death is yet.
Yeah.
And he was talking to his mom one day, and he was like, I want to get a book to read to grandma. And she's like, well, grandma's gone. She's dead. You can't read to her. He's like, well, it's for when she's not dead anymore.
Oh God.
I know. She was just like, I don't know how, because she asked me, like, how do I explain this to him? I'm like, he's not going to get it yet. He's too young. Just keep re-impressing that she's not going to be not dead anymore. Dead's forever.
Yeah.
And it was just so heartbreaking and sweet, because he was like, well, when she's not dead, or when she comes back from heaven, or whatever it was he said. And it was just like, oh God, I don't know how you kept
Yeah.
yourself together, because I would immediately just start sobbing.
Yeah. That would have. Oh God, that'd be hard. That'd be so hard.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyway, kids are the best. And
th- they are.
yeah, and anyway, I could go on a whole tangent on kids and them trying to process death. That's both sweet and beautiful and everything. But anyway,
Yeah.
mhm, yeah.
Yeah. Kids are
So,
amazing.
oh God, they are. What's your favorite memory with your grandmother? I mean, outside of the cornbread.
Um. So I've got a couple that really stand out, but I think my favorite thing that I like to remember about her, and I think of whenever I think of her, is doing puzzles.
Mhm.
She was a puzzle fiend. She always had one she was working on, and every summer whenever I'd go visit her, she'd always have puzzles, and I remember getting there, and she'd say, "Oh, I got a couple for us to do together." So, she would keep a lot of my cousins there during the day during the summer. She basically had a daycare, but we'd all play during the day. Sometimes they'd sleep over because I was, spending the week there, and we'd have, sleepovers. But there was always a couple nights a week where it would be just me and her, and we get to hang out in the kitchen, at the dining table, and we'd work on a puzzle together and just talk, and it. She did a really good job of making you feel special and making you feel seen,
Oh,
and it was just, that's one of those things I cherish. Just getting to sit down and work on those with her.
I love that. I just saw an ad on somewhere the other day for advent calendar puzzles. I don't know if you've seen those or
Really?
not. Yeah, it's you get a box, and there's a bunch of little boxes, and each little box has like a section of a puzzle. So every day you put like 20 pieces together or
That's pretty
something.
cool.
I know. I kind of want to get one.
I kind of want to get one now too.
See? And well, you'll have to think about grandma when you do that, though.
Yeah. That's
Obviously.
Yeah, and that's my daughter now. She loves to do puzzles too, which for 7, it's probably not too surprising. But every time she works on one, or every time she's ever worked on one, I always think about my grandmother. And like, okay, I don't know if that's something in the DNA or just
Mhm.
coincidence, but I can't help thinking like, okay, that's a little bit of my grandmother in her.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Do you see anything else of your grandmother in your daughter? I'm curious now.
I don't know. I mean, because I think I see more of my grandfather in her, and
Okay.
my grandfather passed away a few years ago too.
Mhm.
And I've joked before, and I am similar to my grandfather in personality. I'm a little guy with a big personality. That's what I've always said. Goofy. I'll be nice. I'm a nice person, I think, but I'm just goofy as the day is long. And my grandfather was the same way, and my daughter,
Aw.
she's taken after me in that regard too. So,
Hmm.
you know,
Aw, I love that. Yeah, the grandfather who owned the fountain pen and the compass I have, I never met him. He passed away before I was born,
mm,
but my mom always tells me he would have just loved me. He
yeah.
just absolutely would have loved me. So I'm very sad I never got to meet him, but I get to at least hear stories about him all the time. That's something.
Yeah, I mean, and see, but that's a sense of grief too, and
Mhm.
that's an odd one because you almost grow into that one,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
Hmm. I do remember when I was young, all my friends would talk about going to see their grandma and grandpa. And I had both my grandfathers died before I was born. So I never met
Mm,
either one of my grandfathers. And we would go visit my grandmothers, but there was never a grandfather in the picture. And I was like, grandpas? I
Yeah,
just like, how little kids process things. I just assumed nobody had grandfathers. They all
yeah.
die before you're born, but yeah, obviously that wasn't the case. um, but as I learned like that, I started getting a little jealous. I'm like, I want a grandfather.
Yeah.
So, that's okay.
It
Both my grandmothers were fantastic. So,
and that's one of those. I mean, as you know this now as you're older, you appreciate that, but there's nothing wrong, I think, with having a long for that.
yeah,
Growing up.
yeah. Um, oh man, I had a question and it completely escaped my brain. This is late for me. I'm usually not up this late. So,
Look, I understand. I had a long day. And I remember last time I was laying in bed, I was like, oh God, I got the interview tomorrow. So I was excited because we haven't
yeah.
had a chance to talk in a bit. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'm looking forward to this
Yeah.
one.
I was looking forward to it too. So don't get me wrong. I'm happy to do this. I'm just not used to being awake. I'm an old lady. I go to bed early. Anyway. Yeah, so I'm gonna turn the tables because you always ask this question. If you could have one last meal with your
Oh,
grandmother, what would it be?
oh man. You know what? Something that my sister, I think it's her favorite meal. And I'm gonna bring this up because I'd love to be able to enjoy it with her too. And I know my brother and my mom, we'd all be happy to sit down and have this with her. She did make really good chicken and rice. Nothing she made was like wild or out there, but just it was very much that like I guess it's that you make it 10,000 times and you just know how to do it.
Hmm.
I'd love to have the chicken and rice, but again, fried cornbread, I'd have to have that, and I would watch her like a hawk to know exactly how like I would have to break out a scale, like how much are we putting in here?
Yeah.
Is it lard? Is it the cast iron? Like what is it exactly? But it would be the chicken and rice. Give me that, but give me the fried cornbread,
Hmm.
and I'd love to just sit down and just go back to my childhood. Put some old Andrew Griffith show on in the background, you know,
Yay.
and just eat and talk and maybe do a puzzle.
I love that. It's in when I talk to people, especially those who are clients of mine for grief coaching. I usually ask them, like, well, if your person, whoever it is, could come back today, like, what would you do? If you had
Yeah.
one day to spend with them, and almost everybody says like something kind of mundane, like just sitting and having coffee, or going for a walk at our favorite park. And I love that because I feel like that's where we find the most meaning and beauty in the world is in the mundane. It's
Yeah.
not like if my brother were alive for one more day, I wouldn't take him to Disney World because we're not going to connect.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong, we'll have a blast. But if you only have that one day, you really want to connect with those people. And you're not going to do that climbing the Eiffel Tower or Mount Everest or whatever. You're going to do that just having a picnic.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you say that because, I mean, that's why I like to ask people that question is because what I have found is that it is mostly the simple stuff. Like I've never had anyone say like, "Oh, I'd love to take him out to a fancy dinner and get an 8-course meal."
Mm-hmm.
It's stuff like, I'd like to grab a hot dog on walking to the
Yeah.
soccer stadium.
Yeah.
Or I had one guest who and her mother's still alive, but she's been struggling with Alzheimer's for the last several
Mm-hmm.
years. She said that we used to like get spoonfuls of peanut butter and we put chocolate chips on the counter and
That was
just
Jennifer Landon, wasn't it?
yep.
Oh, yes. I remember her. Yeah, she was on my show.
Yeah, no, I love it. We've got a little grief circle
I
of like people,
know.
but whenever she and I talked about it, I think she was a little surprised by the question, and she ended up like that weekend or like a weekend after she was visiting her mother, and she did it. She sent me pictures of them enjoying it,
Yeah.
and she said like her mom was like, she enjoyed it, but like for her, it really meant a lot to her that she got to go back to her childhood a little bit and
Yeah.
relive something that simple with her.
Hmm.
Um, so you're right. It's there's beauty in the mundane and the simple, I think.
Hmm. I think that's where we make the deepest connections with people, So
Yeah.
that's what means most. Oh, yay. I love that. All right. Well, before we get to the death deck, uh, do you have any final thoughts or things you'd like to share about your grandmother?
This one, I think the only person I've told this is my wife, and this might make me sound crazy, but I'm also tired enough to share it anyway. I remember the day at her funeral, um, you know, just kind of watching the service and standing off to the side. We did the funeral home thing, and then we went to the graveside, and we did a great little graveside service too. And I remember standing there with my wife and my daughter, and just looking at my grandmother's casket and feeling something on my shoulder and just what is I look over and like it's a tree branch kind of tapping me. And look, I am not a ghost person. I don't know from a spiritual standpoint, I on a good day I think I float more towards agnostic. I don't know, but what
Yeah.
I do know is that day in that moment I chose to accept that was her just saying
Hmm.
I love you. I'm still here with you. Um And if it was just the wind, I don't care. I choose not to accept that. So
Yeah.
that was her just giving me a little tap.
Aw. Okay, well then I'll share a quick story with you that just happened recently, very similar. Um, it was like 2 weeks ago. I can't explain why, nothing happened, nothing provoked this, but I just started thinking about my brother a lot.
No.
And I just started feeling real like anxious and upset about a lot of the unanswered questions around his death. And I was just like, it was just hitting my brain. Almost felt like he was trying to tell me something, but I don't know what. And I was at home and I was just kind of like rolling it around in my head. And my husband was at work. So I texted him and I was just like, look, I don't know what's going on. Like my brother's in my head a lot. I feel like he's trying to tell me something. I don't know. Maybe I should talk to a psychic, kind of like half joking, but half not.
Yeah.
And he texted me back and he was like, could you do me a favor? And at first I thought he was completely ignoring me. I was like, oh, thanks. He's like, would you go up to my office at home, turn off light, close the door, and tell me if there's an LED light glowing on the nightstand? And I was like, okay. He's a lighting person. I thought maybe something was glitching through one of his apps or something. So
Gotcha.
I go upstairs, go in his office, close the door, turn off the light. And I'm like, yeah, sure enough, there's this little thing. And I go to pick it up and it's like a little LED clip light that you can put like on your purse or in your bag or whatever. And I was like, yeah, it's on, but I can't, the button's broken. I can't get it to turn off. So his mom died the same year my brother did. He's like, mom got me that for Christmas the year before she died. It turned on 2 days ago and I can't figure out how to turn it off. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh, okay. Oh, yep.
Yep. Yep. I
Again,
do. Hmm.
I don't know everything I believe in, but
Yeah. And I'm kind of a skeptic, sort of like, I don't know. I waffle back and forth between a little woo woo and a little skeptic, but that was like, oh my God, what?
you know what? Sometimes though we don't need to question it.
Nope.
Just
Nope.
accept it.
Yep. I mean, I am quite sure we could find an explanation for all of this, but I'm just going to appreciate it as it is. So
I'm right there with you.
all right. Well, on that note, I actually have the end of life deck. We're going to pull from that one instead of the death deck this week because I like the questions on these cards a little bit better. So, all right. Okay. I think I've read this one before, but I like this. Palliative care can provide extra support while allowing you to maintain your current treatments. Services often include pain and symptom management and emotional spiritual care. Is this something you would consider if you met the criteria for these services? So palliative care is a little bit different than hospice because this is one you take when you're still receiving treatment.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that's it's the thing. It's hard to think about not being in the situation. I think in that situation I have to look at, quality of life, and also, I mean, I would want as much time with my family as possible, and I'd want to be as engaged as I could be. I think I would really depend on, what's going to give me the most bang for my buck with my family.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a conversation I have with my clients a lot. And I'm kind of the same way. Like, I know myself. I know I'm stubborn, like all hell. And you will tell me like, you should do this. I'll be like, no, you can't tell me what to do because that's just who I am. But I'm constantly preaching, like, go ahead and start palliative care like anytime you can, because they could give you better quality of life and more time with your family. So
yeah, that's the thing. I mean, give me that time.
Yeah, that's all everybody wants. It's just more time,
There's never enough.
I know. All right, Andrew, it was a lovely, lovely talking to you again. Always is.
You too, Nikki. I always enjoy getting to chat with you.
Yay. All right. Any final? Oh, well, yeah. Sorry. Let's your podcast.
It's late. It's okay. We've already established it's late.
It is a little late. So yes, tell us about your podcast and where people can find you.
Yeah, so it's on all the podcast platforms. But if you search Our Last Meal, or you can go to ourlastmealpod.com or ourlastmeal.com. I'm gonna check that. Ourlastmeal.com. I should know that off the top of my head. You can find me there. You can also go to Our Last Meal Pod on social media. So Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. I don't have Twitter or X or whatever anymore. Got rid of that. Yeah, you can reach out there. You also, if you just wanted to send me an email, if you are interested in being a guest, I love getting to talk to people. It's ourlastmealpod@gmail.com. I have found that everyone has a story. Everyone has somebody they care about that maybe is not in your life anymore, from be it death, be it, friendship that ended, be it a relationship that ended. And you probably have a food that makes you think of that person.
Oh, yes.
So if you would ever like to talk about it, I would love to talk with you. I really make it a point I want those stories to honor the person and the relationship. So I try to make them as conversational as possible, just like you do. And I will say I've not had anybody that told me they regretted coming on and talking about someone, even when it's hard. And just like this today.
Yeah.
I'm going to get to go to bed tonight thinking happy thoughts about my grandma. So I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Yeah. I get a lot of thank yous after this show too, for when I interview people. Just thanks for letting me share my story, because that's all people want. They want to share their story. They want to be heard. So
yeah,
that's why you and I exist in this world, to share people's stories.
I'm here for it.
All right, Andrew, it's been a pleasure. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Another huge thank you to Andrew for coming on my show. Andrew, thank you so much. And don't forget to check out his show, Our Last Meal Podcast. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please don't forget to check me out on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. You get access to my podcast a week early, grief affirmations, check-ins. You will get to see the video of Andrew and I talking. So yeah, go check that out. And don't forget to check me out on the socials. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Nikki the Death Doula. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have an amazing week. And remember, as always, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, and grief doesn't always have to suck.